All right. So it says I'm broadcasting, but I don't see my image. Oh, great. Well, this is not what I'd hoped for. Let's see, maybe. No, that didn't work either. Darn. Oh, no, that's the only camera that's hooked up. At least the microphone's working. Well, hopefully you can see something besides just the logo. Gosh, and this is such an exciting event for me because there's so much happening in space right now. Like, I want to keep this to 30 minutes, but I don't think I'm going to be able to do it. And I'll have links to most of the things I'm talking about in the description. I'll add that after the show's done. So by, maybe an hour or so after the broadcast is over, there'll be links to a lot of the news articles that I'm pulling this information from. So all kinds of exciting things happening. Of course, everybody knows SpaceX lost a rocket and lost some pretty important cargo in the process. But I'm sure they'll recover, and I'm sure they'll have additional, NASA will have, one of the things they lost was the new docking ring for the commercial crew craft to dock to the International Space Station. The International Space Station, in May, they moved one of the sections of the International Space Station from one connection to a different connection to make room for the commercial crew dockings. I guess that particular port is what they needed access to, and the docking ring was one of the things that was going up in this last SpaceX mission that failed during the launch. But SpaceX is, in addition to doing that, is doing a lot of other really cool things, or Elon Musk. SpaceX just filed with the FCC to begin testing their satellite internet connective system. They're talking about putting in place a constellation of 4,000 satellites and providing satellite-driven, uninterruptible internet connection from this constellation. I heard an interview with Elon Musk recently where he talked about the technology. Apparently they're going to just have a special antenna that you hook your router up to, and the antenna just lays flat anywhere where there's clear view of the sky, and it will pick up the satellites. It has some kind of electronic tuning system that allows it to track the satellites as they go over, and so you'll have continuous connection. And they said there's a 20 or 25 millisecond, I think it was 20 millisecond delay in between the satellite and your antenna. So it's nominal. It's actually less of a delay, way less of a delay than you would get from satellite TV. A connection with the TV satellites, they're way further out, and that takes several seconds. Anyway, so that's sounding exciting. And SpaceX is not the only company that is going for this internet, satellite internet connection. Google has talked about it and has decided to back SpaceX, along with Fidelity is also backing SpaceX in the development of this internet satellite system. There's also a company in Europe called Black Sky Global that's planning on developing a 60 satellite internet connection. I think they're geared more towards the commercial market, or setting up individual satellite dishes that would then provide internet service in their local area. Not hugely different than what already exists, but because it'll be low Earth orbit satellites, there you won't have the time delay that they have with current satellite phones and satellite internet through the geosynchronous orbit satellites. And in the UK, there's a company, I think it's in the UK, maybe it's in Canada. Anyway, a company called OneWeb is planning on building 900 satellites to build a satellite internet connection, and they've actually hired Airbus to build those satellites. So that's a pretty major step towards that. So not too much longer, and we'll have internet from space. So let's go from the inner solar system and work our way outward. In the past few months, the satellite that had been orbiting Mercury for, I think, a few years and gathering data, and finally ran out of fuel and was crashed into Mercury. Scientists have discovered that Venus has active volcanoes on it, big volcanoes covering large swaths of the planet. Venus is a fascinating place. Its day is longer than its year because it rotates. It's almost tidally locked with the sun, I don't know, or something, because it rotates very, very slowly. And what was I read something that said it rains sulfuric acid, but there was something, there was something about metal dust too. Anyway, it snows metal, liquid, I don't know. Anyway, so Venus is fascinating. So a lot going on around on Earth, but not as exciting as the stuff that's happening further out in space. Oh, I know it's closer to the sun than we are right now, probably. Comet 67P that has the ESA's Rosetta satellite and Philae lander on it, on the surface. The Philae recently woke up and is now apparently communicating well with the and sending information to Rosetta. They still don't know exactly where that thing crash landed at, but they're expecting to get more information. Part of the problem with not being able to identify exactly where it is, they've got some pretty good speculations where it is, but the comet is now ejecting a lot of material. Recent photo bursts, if you will, a series of photos of the atmosphere around, or the area, the coma around 67P. They've seen there's objects orbiting the comet there that are as big as a half a meter, and there are objects flying out from dust and larger objects. They've seen objects as large as 2 meters leave the surface during this cometary activity. And so they've had to move Rosetta further out. So its orbit now is quite a ways out from 67P to keep it from getting damaged. They had some scary moments when the dust got too thick and Rosetta got confused and could have crashed, or could have gone haywire. Fortunately, they were able to recover from that. But when the coma first started really developing, they were a lot closer. And so that's why they haven't been able to find. One of the reasons they haven't been able to identify exactly where Philae landed, because they can't get Rosetta close enough to get detailed enough pictures that Philae would even show up. I mean, I think Philae right now, at its current distance, would at most take up 2 pixels. That's if they got a good clear view of it and it was shining brightly, which we know it's in a recessed area, fairly heavily shaded area, and it may be at an angle. or is probably sitting down at an angle, not, flat to the surface. So spotting it with Rosetta right now is virtually impossible. On the bright side, they'll be getting a lot of data from Philae for the next month or two, maybe even through the end of the year. I'm not sure, since we don't know. It just woke up recently because finally it was getting enough sunlight. So it may be that as the comet passes its closest point to the sun and heads back out, that it will be getting a lot more. But anyway, the ESA has decided to extend Rosetta's mission. It was originally scheduled to go until December, but they've decided to extend it out to September. They gave it an additional 9 months. After September, it will be too far from the sun for the solar panels to generate enough power to run the satellite. I don't know if they're going to leave Rosetta in orbit, in an relatively stable and safe orbit around the comet while it heads back out to its furthest point from the sun and then comes back in and fires back up. That would be really cool if they could, but who knows. But so they'll be able to continue to gather data on the comet until September. Oh, and I think the plan currently is to, in its last days of good battery charge, they're going to spiral its orbit lower and lower and lower over 67P and get some really close close-ups, and then crash it into let it crash into the comet. I don't know if it's possible for them to salvage it. So that's probably the best option, I would suspect. Okay, let's see. Did I mention? I did not. NASA has selected the commercial crew test astronauts. Bob Behnken, Eric Bowe, Doug Hurley, and Suni Williams will be the astronauts flying the SpaceX and Lockheed Boeing. I can't remember the name of the other company that's building a commercial crew. I'm a SpaceX enthusiast, and so I kind of have a bias against the other company. I'm sorry. I'll try to correct that for future news. But for the two companies that are producing astronaut carrying spacecraft to launch astronauts to the International Space Station and other purposes, the test pilots will be Bob Behnken, Eric Bowe, Doug Hurley, and Suni Williams for NASA astronauts. So that's kind of exciting. Let's see. Let's see if I covered everything. Okay, so that one of the things, let's go back to Rosetta for just a second. Some of the things they've discovered is that there are many small objects orbiting 67P, from a few centimeters in diameter up to half a meter in diameter. And they say that many of these objects appear to be in stable orbits and have been orbiting the comet for a long period of time. These aren't things that were just thrown off, although new stuff is being thrown up constantly now that it's getting close to the sun. They've spotted water ice on the surface of the comet in some of the shady areas. They have now seen water ice. And they've also spotted sinkholes, just really deep, like natural wells, if you will, in the surface of the comet that have jets inside of them. There's material spraying out from them into space. So that's pretty cool. And they've gotten some really spectacular pictures of it. It's kind of a boring surface on some levels, but it's very different than a moon or the surface of any of the other things that we've gotten pictures from in space. It's a lot more pockmarked, as you'd expect, a lot more jagged, and a lot of interesting features. So There'll be linked down below to places with pictures and the latest information on Rosetta and Philae. The out towards Mars, the Martian rovers, Mars from about June 7th to about June 27th, the sun was between Earth and Mars. And so communication with rovers and the satellites orbiting Mars kind of goes on hold. I think they can get some telemetry through, but it's precious little. And but now they've reconnected and everything's fine. So back to getting more science from Mars. And not a whole lot of new exciting news coming in from Mars with the rovers there. Some interesting stuff, but you know, it's not as exciting as it first was. However, NASA is testing its new supersonic deceleration system that they're developing for future Mars landings, and there's one supposed to launch next year, I think. And they're working hard at that. The system they're developing uses a heat shield that balloons out, so it increases its surface area massively, which hopefully will slow the capsule coming in down significantly. And then there's supposed to be a supersonic parachute deploy. The first time they deployed the parachute, it completely failed. And the second time, it opened and then shredded. So they've still got work to do on the supersonic parachute. And there's probably it's probably going to be a similar system, I'm assuming, as they used with the Curiosity rover, where after the parachute opens and slows it down to a certain speed, at some point the heat shield falls away and you have some kind of propulsive landing system. Yeah, we'll see how that works out. But they're working on it. The development has been ongoing. They call it a supersonic decelerator. Okay. Onward and outward. So the spacecraft Dawn, which is currently orbiting the dwarf planet Ceres, which is the largest object in the asteroid belt. And they've just, at the end of June, they completed a period of orbiting Ceres from 2,700 miles up. And they're currently moving down to a lower orbit 900 miles up. They still don't know what the mysterious white spots are, which is it's the closer they get, the more detail, but it's still the detail small, and what used to look like a big blob and a little blob is turning into a big blob and a few smaller blobs that are relatively close together of light color, are exceptionally reflective area. So we still don't know what that is. But from this mapping orbit that they did, they've discovered there's a solitary large mountain, kind of pyramid-shaped mountain on Ceres. It seems to be just about the only major mountain on Ceres, and so that's kind of a curiosity as well. They'll reach the 900-mile orbit and start mapping orbit from that height. As they say, mid-August. Yeah, mid-August. So it'll be a few more weeks before we have more pictures of Ceres and maybe a better idea of what those mysterious spots are. So, last but not least, and I could probably spend half an hour just talking about this, In 3 days, New Horizons is going to fly by Pluto. New Horizons was launched 9 years, almost nine and a half years ago, and has been headed towards Pluto for nearly a decade. It's traveling at somewhere in the neighborhood of 32,000 miles per hour. So it's really moving along. Right now, it is the fastest moving man-made object ever, by a considerable margin. And it's moving so fast that that all of its science that it's going to do, all of its studying of Pluto and its moons and Pluto's atmosphere and all of the science that it's going to be done is going to be done on an automated basis. It's 4.5 light hours from Earth to New Horizons and Pluto. So it's a 9-hour round trip for a message. So they've been taking measurements of the distance between the satellite, between the New Horizons and Pluto, trying to get a more accurate reading, because at the distance from Earth that we've been measuring where Pluto is, there's a pretty good range of variation. I mean, it takes 4.5 minutes, 4.5 hours for the light to get from Pluto to here. So where it is exactly at any given moment in relation to the Earth is a little iffy for using current technology. And because of that communication lag, we can't make last minute changes based on new data. Basically about 10 hours before it passes Pluto is the last time we would have a chance to make any changes. Everything's got to run automatically. And so they've been expending a lot of time gauging at the distance and adjusting New Horizons flight path and its trajectory speed, so that they can hit that optimal window of data gathering when all the moons are in just the right place and all of that. So 5 moons around, of the 5 moons around Pluto, they've already uncovered a lot of information. It's still millions of miles away from, even today, it's still millions of miles away from Pluto, but been taking pictures. And we know that there's 5 moons. One of them is so small we haven't been able to determine how big it is. We know that it's there, but we don't know how big it is. So the moons are Charon, which is 750 miles in diameter, Hydra, which is 36 miles by 21 miles. It's kind of an oblong shaped or a goose egg shaped moon, as is Nix, which is 35 miles by 16 miles. And then there's Kerberos. I'm not quite sure how to pronounce that. It's 19 miles in diameter, and it's really, really dark, like briquette dark. We can hardly see it, even with as close as New Horizons is to Pluto now. I don't think they've been able to capture an image of it because it just doesn't reflect much light. I'm not quite sure how they spotted it. Maybe by transits between, where it transited across Pluto. I don't know, but they know it's out there. And because Charon is so much bigger, 750 miles in diameter, it's not very dense, but it's like almost like a binary planet. It's not big enough to call them a binary planet, but Pluto and Charon rotate around a common center, so they have a binary relationship, and so that affects the orbits of the other moons. The other moons are all very small, and Nix, they say, actually tumbles because of the influence of Charon, where it it'd be going around, and you'd be on the North Pole when the sun goes down, and then you'd be on the South Pole when the sun comes up. Or, you know, it's unpredictable. So it's actually kind of tumbling as it travels around. And so it's a very complex and fascinating, Pluto's a very fascinating system. The photos have already showed, even at this great distance, quite a bit of color variation on Pluto. And one of the interesting things that they've spotted is that Charon has a dark pole. One of its poles is dark in color, like really dark. They're like calling it anti-ice, you know, what you'd normally expect to see in a polar region. It's instead of being light, it's dark. And let's see. So that's going to be interesting. On July 4th, NASA, for about 80 minutes, they lost contact with the with New Horizons. Apparently, it was a timing issue. It wasn't, you know, it's not anything that's going to cause a big problem, but it was a little bit of a freak out to get this close. You're 10 days away from passing Pluto, and suddenly your spacecraft isn't making contact with you anymore. That the break was only a little more than an hour, but it was enough, I'm sure, to freak them out pretty good. So yeah, it's 2.9 billion miles from Earth, and in 3 days, on July 14th, it will pass Pluto, and we will get more information and more pictures and stuff about Pluto than we've learned in the last, since it was discovered 100 years ago or so. And I don't think it was 100 years ago. It was like 1930 something that it was discovered. So, yeah. And for anybody who's wondering, the New Horizons uses a nuclear power source similar to what was put on Voyagers, that are now, one of which is now interstellar. And so it'll last for a long time. It will have power for a long time. And after it goes past Pluto, the plan is to send New Horizons out into the Oort cloud and see if they can do flybys past other Oort cloud objects. And they've identified a couple of them that are possible. And so there's a limited amount of fuel left, but the spacecraft's communication and science gathering capabilities will continue for many, many years after it leaves Pluto. So that's probably the most exciting thing going on right now. Yeah, pay attention to the news in 3 days. Of course, we won't have any information until about 9 to 10 hours after it goes by, because while New Horizons is going past Pluto, it's going to just be gathering data. It's going to be pointed towards Pluto and Charon, and it's just going to be gathering data. And then after it goes by, assuming it doesn't hit anything and blow itself to smithereens, you know, some undiscovered object orbiting in that vicinity, then it will start transmitting. And of course, it takes 4.5 hours for the data to get back to Earth, and, you know, probably at least a few hours for them to convert it into something they can pass to the public. I mean, raw data is not like what we send over the internet. It's, you know, unprocessed images, unprocessed data. So, but yeah, in the next few days, let's see, by the 15th, I expect to start seeing some pretty cool stuff showing up in the news media. Well, to my surprise, I have managed to just fill up 30 minutes, And there's a few other things I could talk about, but I'm more anxious just to get this posted and see how it turned out. Thanks for listening. See you next week.